Hello, my name is ASLAUG and I'm a compulsive overeater. I weigh and measure by the GreySheet 3 meals a day. I write them down and I announce them to my sponsor. I eat nothing between my meals except coffee, tea, and non-caloric drinks, and the abstinence is the most important thing in my life. I never thought maybe 15 years ago I would be able to say these things, and they were true for me, that the abstinence was the most important thing in my life. Because there were plenty of other things that were so important in my life, and food was the most important thing in my life at the time. I'm pretty much sure. I can't remember exactly everything, but before I became abstinent, I have now been abstinent since GSA abstinent since October 2010. So that's 12 years or more, and I never had thought at that time that would be possible for me. I'm now 65 years old, so I was something like 52 or something when I became abstinent, and all my life, practically, I had been overweight. Not when I was a baby and a small toddler, but from the age of 6, I remember it very clearly when I became a food addict. Actually, when I was a tiny kid, I was always sick and I had no appetite. My parents, they were so anxious about me eating nothing. They were always trying to get me eat, but I was all the time. I had fever. I have bad tonsils, and finally I was operated with tonsils in my throat. And when I remember it clearly, when I had the tonsils taken away, I certainly got appetite. It was really everything started to taste perfectly, was so good. And I had appetite, so much appetite that in 2 years, I was really overweight. I was really, had problems with my weight. I remember when I was around 10 or so, my parents took me to the doctors because there must have been something wrong with my, metabolism. Because we became really fat, and there was nothing wrong. And they just, the doctors, they just said that she will just probably, when she becomes a teenager, she will become normal again. And I was trying to get rid of those things because of course, I didn't feel well. I had difficulties in running. I had difficulties in playing outdoors with my friends. I remember in school, gymnastics, for example, that was the most terrible class of all the classes that I had. So no real trauma or anything like that when I was a kid, just the fact that food was good. It was not especially carbs, not especially carbs, but just food in general. No, I ate a lot. I had these huge volumes of food that I could eat. I have definite souvenirs, so I can remember taste of things when I was a kid. And so when I was a teenager, I started this yo-yo thing. I started all these programs, dieting programs, and I was sometimes a few months or maybe sometimes a few years, I became nearly normal. Sometimes I remember, for example, around 20, I can see by pictures that were taken of me at the time that I was, not fat really. I was just a little bit maybe more than normal, but in my head, I was so fat. I really felt fat. I felt miserable. I had no self-confidence. And I sort of, but you know, that would not help me not to eat. That would not avoid me from having food as the major thing in my life. And little by little, I sort of started living for food. I was not eating to live, but living to eat, much rather. And I enjoyed a lot cooking. I enjoyed inviting people. And for me, that was an excuse to eat, you know, have festivities, you know, always cooking, always eating. And of course, I cooked so much that I had a lot of leftovers. So I would, you know, be able to eat on my own when all the guests were gone, maybe for 2 or 3 days. And little by little, I became, you know, bigger, but there was this yo-yo thing always. And I moved during my 20s. I moved to France. I continued to, you know, this program of mine, you know, being the one who is inviting all the time and cooking. And, you know, people liked my cooking, but that was, you know, not surprising because I had such a lot of experience doing that. And at the same time, I felt most of the time miserable. I was quite depressed, and I went to see psychiatrists for depression. I was sort of fighting with these thoughts that I was, you know, miserable, and then, you know, I was when I moved back home, I started working as a tourist guide. That was okay in the beginning. I was not that overweight, but little by little, it became difficult for me to do this job because I was very often climbing mountains and, you know, doing a lot of things like that. So when I was like 40 kilos overweight, and that's a lot for me because I'm only 154 centimeters high, so 40 kilos overweight is very much. And then my health started to be bad. I had too high blood pressure. I had started to be, you know, have pre-symptoms of being diabetic and other things like that. So that was something that I actually had to do something about because of physical reasons. At that moment, I never connected the way I felt in my head to what my body felt. So I decided that I had to do some major diet to lose weight. And I had been to all sorts of programs, you know, counting calories, weighing myself every week in a program that was open for people, so everybody could hear how much you lost that week. Or so. Plenty of all kinds of programs like that. And there was this person in my family who also had been overweight, and she was actually, all of a sudden, she started losing weight. And what was more than that, she was happy about it. She could eat. She ate a lot. She could eat big meals, and she didn't feel hungry. Always when I had been doing these programs before. I was hungry. I was miserable because I didn't get what I needed. You know, they said just a tiny little bit of carbs, but this tiny little bit of carbs was too much for me because I always wanted some more and some more and some more. And normally after a few weeks of all those programs, I just collapsed. Everything, everything was again the same way as before. And so I asked this person in my family what she was doing, and she was wise enough, not probably because she knew how full of prejudice I was, because I was very arrogant, a lot of prejudice, and I had no connection with any kind of higher power. I did not accept. I was the one who was directing my own life, and I could do it. I could, and it was actually right that I could control most of my life in other fields. My life professionally in general was okay. Everything was more or less okay, but not the food. And I did not realize that my depression had anything to do with it. Did not realize that, I had sometimes real big conflicts with some people in my family. Did not realize that that was something that could be changed. And if she had told me that I had to, or it was something to do with a higher power, I probably would not have gone into this. I think that I was too arrogant at the time to look at the thing that way. And we are in Iceland. Here in Iceland, we are fortunate to have a company, a private treatment center, private clinic, it's a kind of a clinic where there are specialists who help us that way. I went there in the beginning, and I had a professional help to do weighing and measuring 3 meals a day by a program which is very similar to the GS program, not exactly the same, but very similar. And they taught us little by little in tiny doses, which was actually what I needed, the steps. First of all, I remember when I said, I can control those things completely myself. I don't need any higher power. So why aren't you then slim, and why aren't you happy? Oh yeah, well, I didn't think of that, Oh, that was something, yeah. No. And why didn't you control your food? Well, food is different, yeah. And food was different, yeah. So I was prepared there to go into the GSA program in about few months later, and I had the choice. They had the choice between GS or a GSA or another fraternity, 12 Steps Fraternity for Food, and I looked upon both, and I saw, well, I need the strict program, because if I have a choice to eat, I have to have this gray sheet to know what food I can eat. I cannot decide myself to what I'm abstinent. I knew that already. I am, my personality has an, addictive, tendencies. And I, for example, stopped smoking when I was 30 years old. And I said, I'm stopping, because I could not face the fact I was stopping forever. I said, I'm taking a pause until I'm 60. So I'm not going to smoke for 30 years. And then when I'm 60, I'll see. Well, when I was 45, I was in a party with friends of mine. And I said, well, it's now 15 years since I smoked, so I can take a cigarette. and which I did. The day after, I was restless. I really was looking everywhere. Where can I find the cigarette? Where can I? And I said to myself, I remember when I started smoking again. I really knew that the food was even worse. I was more addicted to food than to the tobacco. And so I said, I cannot decide that I'm just going to have a bite here or a bite there. No, if I do that, there will be no ending. There will be, I will never be able to control this, because I cannot control this. And also what I did before I became abstinent, I skipped meals. So I was so hungry when I came home. I could not resist, nothing resisted. So while I was preparing my meal, I would be eating half of the meal just while I was cooking. And so I was, of course, if you do this all the time, your sugar level in your blood just falls down. And I became so, obviously, so, I became angry very easily, which still happens, even though I'm eating those wonderful meals 3 times a day. And normally, that's okay. But the other day, for example, not very, jump from one thing to another, excuse me. But the other day I was with my son in the car, and he said to me afterwards, well, all of a sudden you became angry and annoyed. And, and I said, yes, I remember I was hungry. And if I'm hungry, I just lose my temper, and that is because I had not eaten before we went together doing something. But I have to be very careful about these things. So I enjoy really these 3 meals a day, and they are big enough that I feel happy, I'm satisfied, I don't get so easily hungry. If I remember. I have to remember eating at certain hours. And yes, and there is also, I remember the freedom when I realized I didn't have those thoughts all the time about food. I have those 3 meals a day. I decide them in advance, and I know that there is a meal coming, and I know what it is, and I don't have to think, should I buy that or should I buy this? And I was always negotiating in my head, even at nighttime. I remember, I, for example, ate too much for dinner one night, and then I was so, I had bad conscience. I shouldn't have eaten so much. I feel bad. I have eaten too much, And then I said to myself, tomorrow I'm not going to eat so much. And then I tried. I didn't eat so much that night for dinner. And then about 10 or 11 o'clock, when I was going to bed, I said, well, I should have eaten a little bit more because I'm sort of hungry. Should maybe take something from the fridge. Should maybe have a glass of that or a slice of this. No, you said to yourself you shouldn't. Okay, I said to myself that I shouldn't. I went to bed, and then this thought went on and on and on, and until I finally gave up and I went to the fridge. And this was like that sometimes, all the time, and I was so tired of this. And these things, when I realized, I remember I'd been abstinent for a few months, when I realized I don't have these thoughts anymore. And I realized also, I remember I was walking from my work over a parking lot, and I thought I would, I felt like I was just flying. I was so free, and I felt so light. And I said to myself, I like to live. And Sunday mornings when I could sleep in, I just wanted to wake up, do something interesting with my son or something like that. I didn't like before. I just wanted to sleep. And I even remember one weekend when my son was not at home, I lost a whole Saturday because, I remember when I woke up, it was Sunday, and I went to bed on a Friday night. So that was really terrible. And then little by little, I learned to use the steps. I had never known anything about 12 steps program before I went into this program. I didn't know what they were all about. I felt it was so, in a face-to-face meeting, sitting in a circle, answering to everyone, my name is ASLAUG. Hello, ASLAUG. Everyone sat in the choir, and I thought this was stupid. It felt so miserable. I never thought I would become a part of that. How can I say the abstinence is the most important thing in my life? It was stupid. But now I know, and I knew a few months after I started that abstinence was the basis, was the whole foundation for my whole life, because I would not be able to be there for my family. I would not be able to do interesting things. I probably would not, I would not be as healthy as I am now. And I also feel not like a victim anymore. I am a doer now in my life. I'm just not a victim everyone behaves badly to, because I learned doing the steps that, if you argue with someone, if you're angry with someone, which happens, it still happens because I'm just human, but I have learned how to ask myself, what is your part in this? What did you do? Do I have any, do I have anything to blame myself for? And I very often see, first of all, how I look upon things, then how I receive the message from the others. And if I see that I have done something bad to the others, I know now how to go and ask them for forgiveness, or to, so like they say I know how to apologize, and I have gotten peace of mind much more than before. And and I've I try to be quite active in the GSA community in Iceland. I go to at least 2 meetings a week, one face-to-face and one Zoom meeting a week. That's what I try to do if I can. And sometimes I get angry because in Iceland, there are a lot of people who don't know about the GSA, and a lot of people who are going to bariatric surgery to making their stomach smaller, or bypass or something like that. And sometimes I wish we could be a little bit louder, because we are not supposed to have, we are not supposed to, have, I don't remember how to say it in English, but we should always just be attractive, but not, have a propaganda for our things that I really like to sometimes. So I really need to shout out, there we are, GSA, but I cannot do that. But I try to be open about what I am doing. For example, as I told you, I am a tourist guide, and I go very often on tours where I have to eat with my passengers. And I don't hesitate, not for a moment. And I've been lucky enough to not to have done that ever, to hide my scale. I just take my scale, I put it on the table in restaurants everywhere, and I weigh and measure. People ask, what are you doing? And I just tell them what I'm doing. And like one of my friends said the other day, when people ask her, she said, what? You don't weigh your food? Why? Why don't you weigh your food? So that's you who are strange, not me. But I've never done that. But that's an ideal. So if you have problems with your scale, and so I know there's a few people who have who I've been traveling with, especially Americans. Not so many French people. I know how I'm doing, mostly in French guiding, but sometimes as well in English. And French people, I know, probably the same in Spain. Food is very different, is very important for the cultural life. And it's also in Iceland, we gather around food. It's always when we are celebrating. And I have known many French friends who say, I cannot do this to my mother. I never could do this to her because she won't understand. But then I say, are you doing it for your mother, or are you doing it for yourself? Is it your life or your mother's life? I have to admit that sometimes, especially in the beginning, I had difficulties in saying, no, thank you. I don't eat this. And well, you can take one bite. No, I'm very sorry. If I take one bite, I would not be able to stop. And people have said, like one of my friends here in Iceland, they ask her sometimes, don't you just want a tiny little bit? And she says, no, never, ever. I want a tiny little bit. I want everything. And that's true. We don't, if we are really, if we are food addicts, we don't want a tiny little thing. We want everything. And I finished the package. I finished what's in the fridge. So I will never be able to control myself if I don't have my scale. I know that. So I don't say that I'm doing this until I'm 94 or something. But for the moment, I know that I cannot do anything else, because if I will not become 94 if I don't weigh and measure. Maybe I won't, but anyway, for the moment, I cannot do anything else. And I'm just waiting for them to open an old people's home for people doing GSA. So I think that's all for the moment. But I enjoyed very much being with you. I'm sorry I don't know all this vocabulary in English, but I think I'm done for the moment. So thank you very much. It was interesting to be with you. Thank you.